All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. I couldn't be more excited for this conversation to come because finally on this channel, we're going to talk all about food. And I have a great guest to join me in that discussion. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Laura Flanagan. Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Joel, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, there are quite a few things I want to talk to you about. First and foremost, the reason why we are together is you have a book that just came out. I believe literally just came out based on the day we're recording this conversation. It's a book called Hardcore Vegetarian. Welcome to the Vegedome. It just came out on Process Media, which is an imprint of the great publisher Farrell House. First of all, my most heartfelt congratulations to you on the release of this book. I know writing a book can be arduous, so first of all, congratulations to you on that.
Thank you very much. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about it. I will say to the viewer who may not necessarily know um, what the book entails, it's predominantly a cookbook. What I will say, it's not just a list of recipes, it's also a bit of a memoir. You talk about your cultural history, your family history. So it paints a much wider picture of just recipes. I know myself, I'm a disaster in the kitchen. So I'm more attracted to some of the more autobiographical elements to it. So there's quite a bit going into this book. So first and foremost, take me back to the beginning. When did this idea come for you to put together this book?
So it was definitely a COVID project. I was cooking more,
Mm.
and I love to cook. I cook all the time, but I found myself cooking even more and getting a little creative and thinking, I should write some of this down because I'm an intuitive kind of cook, and I have a lot in my mind what I remember, the recipes that I do frequently, and so I started writing it down. I was like, I think I'd like to write a cookbook, and this was just a real, I'm at home a lot and I have more time kind of project. And I started talking to Harley about it, my husband. And then I started talking to Farrell House about it.
Mm.
And I wanted originally it to be actually called Hardcore Vegetarian Feeding Harley Flanagan. And when you when you read the book, you'll understand that. But the folks at Farrell House were like, "Oh, that sounds weird. I don't know." And I was like, "Oh, I thought it was kind of cute, like like a pet." We kept feeding him, But anyway, so it turned around a little bit during the process, but that's where it started. That's where it started.
Excellent. And I should add for a bit further context for the viewer, who I suspect knows this already, but of course Harley Flanagan is the founder of the Cro-Mags, hardcore music legend, hence I'd imagine inclusion of hardcore in the book title. Um, so was it really your relationship with Harley that spurred on your personal relationship with vegetarianism?
100%. I'm a animal lover, animal advocate in every way. I adore my animals more than pretty much every person I know. Um, However, I was not a vegetarian. I was not raised vegetarian, and I never ate a lot of meat, but I just never was full on. And when I started going out with or whatever Harley, and I cooked a lot, and I started to learn what it meant to um, feed a vegetarian because I love to cook. And so I started to think about what that means. And he started to talk to me about the difficulty of being a vegetarian and always eating side dishes, for example. Like people think that's enough. And so just changing the way I cooked and then as I say in the book, and it's very true, I kind of became a lazy vegetarian because I was like, I don't want to cook so many things. I just want to make one great meal and that's how the journey really began.
Fantastic. Naturally, there are tons of very enticing recipes in the book. I'm gonna have to turn on my stove and actually be an adult and try some of them because they really
You
come
can
out.
have
And they
someone
might,
else do it for you.
yeah, perhaps. And I must say, another really beautiful part of the book. amongst many things, is the photography is just beautiful in this book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
I attribute the photography to Bibbs Carlson, who is a dear friend, Danish friend who lives in New York and has for a long time, and me. So she and I both collaborated on the photography.
well, it all works because one of the initial points you make in the book is about, food is love. Food should be a joyful experience and one that you do share with others. And the photos, I think, really accommodate that. There's a really positive spirit to the book. And I want to get into that a bit further because um, there have been times in my past professional career where I've worked on the media side of the animal rights slash animal liberation world, let's say. And mostly people's hearts are in the right place in that community, but I suspect you'll agree that there's a certain stereotype of vegetarians and particularly vegans that is sometimes well earned, where it's almost lecturing to others about their diets and the ills that they're causing themselves and other living beings by having that diet. I did my best to stress in my time with those folks that, it might be a little bit more effective if you didn't bang people over the head as much as you do, because there shouldn't be punishment. You're not sitting in a classroom. Food is supposed to be about joy. Put the joy into it, and put the reality that we're all just kind of human beings figuring all this stuff out. Whether it's your diet, whether it's your career, relationships with a spouse or children, there's not necessarily a rule book here. So sometimes things need to be a little looser to make them possible. And I bring that up because there's not a single syllable in your book where I got the impression that you were telling others what to do. You actually use the phrase in the book, and I want to make sure I get it right. Um, Go easy and be gentle with yourself.
Yeah,
Um, that is such frankly, a much needed message in the vegetarian slash vegan world. And, of the literature I have on the subject, I've wanted this book for so long that
thank
takes this position and makes it friendly.
you.
Even the use of emojis in the book, you make it very conversational and very relaxed, and that is so needed in this discussion, I find. So I'll get off my soapbox momentarily, but I wanted to share those thoughts with you. And to be honest with you, if I were to be approached by somebody who knew nothing about being vegetarian or vegan or animal rights, what have you, um, there would be two books I'd give them. First being Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, which is more of the moral compass side of it. But I would give them your book too, because yours is the practical, you're around a dinner table, you're with your loved ones, this is how to make it happen side of the coin. And as I
Thank
said,
you.
it's a much welcome addition to the canon of this particular topic. So, did you go into this knowing that was the voice that you would have in preparing this, or was it something that sort of organically happened along the way?
Um, First of all, thank you. I'm honored to be even put in that position, and I appreciate that very much. So I guess so because it's quite conversational, and the way I write is, I mean, in this particular genre, is the way I speak. And I trying to be inclusive because I do believe that food is love and it's the spirit of sharing and nurturing and giving to people, giving your creativity to people that you care about. Beautiful as well as delicious and hopefully healthy too. That's a big gift. And so I feel like, you know, discourse around food has become strange and political and aggressive and preachy. And I don't understand that because the way that I was raised, and again, I wasn't raised a vegetarian, but food was not that complicated. It was just about, family and joy and creativity and getting together and doing something fun and positive that's also delicious and nutritious. And Whole Foods was just a part of that. And so this was not that difficult for me to talk about to people who, especially in America, are kind of lost on the road of processed foods and quick food and also the complications in their relationship to food psychologically because of advertising and media and how food is spoken about and it's just way too complicated. And so for me, I feel like this is just an introduction to people who might want to eat more plant-based stuff and not feel that they're losing out,
Mm,
not feel that they're deprived. And like I think I say this in the book, anything that you're changing that's emotional, that has to do with tradition or family, and it's all tied up in all these emotions that are very powerful and primal, you have to go easy or else it's not going to work. That's why diets don't work.
mhm.
You have to go slowly, let your body change, let your taste buds change, make it a fun experience. And if you fail, you fail. And you don't have to be a vegetarian, at the end of the journey. You can just maybe eat more vegetarian, just add it in. And eventually, I do think that you kind of don't miss it anymore.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've gone through stretches where I've been hardcore vegan for quite a while. I've had stretches where I'm hardcore vegetarian. I would classify myself these days as mostly vegetarian. I'm
yeah,
from New Jersey. When I visit, gotta have my Taylor ham, egg, and cheese, my
you know,
3 times a year.
and not abuse yourself about it, and not it's not a moral, you know what I mean? What you do, it's like when people talk about environmental microplastics and toxic environment, we're never going to get away from it. So you just reduce. If you reduce,
Right.
if everybody reduced a little bit, the effect would be phenomenal. And the same is true with the meat industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fair point. I think 95% consistently over a long period of time, let's say 95% for 5 years, is infinitely better than 100% for 6 weeks.
Exactly. That exactly. And frankly, and I say this in the book as well, I'm really a pescatarian.
Mm,
I do eat fish and I try to keep it as a smaller portion of my diet. So I am a fish eater who's writing a book about vegetarian food. It's sort of a sin, you know?
right.
I mean, I think I say at one point in the book, I mentioned the word bacon. Like, I'm sorry, I said it, bacon, it exists, because I just, like I said, I'm really just trying to help people ease into something
Right.
that could have some health benefits, some environmental benefits, some benefits to all the wonderful animals out there that are walking the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember years ago, my epiphany came when I was at a corporate function in Palm Springs, California. And as you know, certainly in your fields of endeavor, you have these breakfast conferences where there's, acreage of tables of food and some, poorly lit boardroom somewhere or a
Very
hotel.
familiar. Very familiar.
And it was a breakfast meeting, and they just had rows and rows of bacon and sausage and all kinds of things. And which is okay. I mean, people loved it.
No,
I don't know where the thought came, but I'm having my share of it. And then I just looked up at all these trays. I thought, how many animals had to die to make this possible? Where within 24 hours, nobody in this room is going to remember having this breakfast, right? So that started the dialogue internally for me. Like I said, I'm not 100% in any direction, but I've certainly vastly reduced
yeah,
my meat intake, So if we just do a little bit, that's kind of the most important thing. Do a little bit, and then a little
Just
bit will
start.
become a little more.
Exactly.
So I love that you've addressed that in this book in the way you have, where it's a lot more comfortable. And I would say as well too, even the music fans who would subscribe to my channel, even if vegetarianism isn't on your list at the moment or what have you, I would still suggest getting the book because the stories are cool, the voice is cool, and you're
Thank you.
someone, from our greater, music scene world in a way who's telling it the way you're telling it. So I think there's tremendous value in that way too. It's just a cool book, whether you cook or not.
Thank you.
I did want to bring up a topic with you because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I definitely have seen some correlation, obvious correlation between diet and mental health. There was a time I actually worked in social services. So I had a caseload of people from late teens to late 20s generally. And my job was to help them tackle some issues they were having, whether it was physical, in most cases, emotional, mental. So I spent a lot of time with these individuals during their days, and I watched what they ate,
Yeah.
and it was all processed food, fast food, chain store type food. And, I don't say this in any remotely disparaging way about them, but I would look at what they're eating. I'm thinking maybe it's the food, or
Yeah.
maybe the food's contributing to it. So I was curious if you had any perspective on the possible correlation between the two.
Well, I've read what I guess everybody else has read about processed foods, if you read that stuff, and how difficult it is for your body to engage. And I try to reduce all the chemicals that go into my body and the people I feed's bodies, wherever they're coming from. But for me, I mean, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of information out there to look at, but I find it's really intuitive. People don't really listen to their bodies at all.
Mm.
And I know that most people or many people don't have options. There's the fast stuff, the easy
Right.
stuff, and that's really complicated. But I do know that our bodies are just the vehicle that takes us through life to death. And like anything else that is doing work in life, you have to take care of it. You have to treat it. You have to treat it well, or it will break down. And then there are all the other elements, the genetic factors, the environmental factors. I live in Manhattan. That might be a chemical load that somebody who lives in Wisconsin on a farm might not have. So
Right.
there are all these elements. And like we were talking before about the reduction, you can't do it all at once. But if you think about everything you put in your mouth in a day, some of that stuff is not going to be great. And ultimately, over time, that builds up and builds up and builds up, just like a car. You know what I mean? If you're putting bad things in the car, or you're not cleaning it, you're not taking care of it, you're not having it tuned. You take care of I feel like the body is a transient thing, but we have to care for it. So everything I put in to my mouth or to someone who I love, I want to be as clean as can be.
Mm.
So that to me is, if I can do organic, I do organic. I don't want a GMO if that's possible, just because I don't really know where GMO is going. I don't have enough information to make comfortable calls about that. Even though I know technically things have been genetically modified for hundreds of years, just more simply genetically modified, and we're not splicing genes from this animal and putting it in this tomato or that type of thing. But simple, 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 which is why I think a lot of the food in the book is Italian and that's just what I'm most familiar with, but um, it's a lot of simple food where you just let the food talk, you know? In certain times of the year, the vegetables are so outrageous that you need a little bit of olive oil and sea salt and you can call it a day. And to me, that is like the essence of whole food. Don't touch it. It's good as it is. So the more that we can do about with that, it just makes logical sense that if you're putting crazy chemicals and super complicated foods that you don't understand and you cannot pronounce into your body all the time, that is what you're made of.
Mm.
That becomes who you are.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
complicated. When we're talking about like AI learning and how we'd have to have, not just learning information, but also hormonal learning because people's decision making are made up of, how their gut biome is functioning and, whether or not they're having, it's just so complicated that, you got to know what's going in.
Right. And it's a personal experience because, no two people are the same. The same respect you have night people, morning people. Some people don't eat until noon and they're great. Other people have to eat right away and they have to
Right
eat
away.
meals throughout the
Yes.
day. I can tell you when I go on these longer paths where I'm either entirely meat free or mostly meat free, one thing that happens to me, and you and I have similar paths, and I'm a writer editor by trade, so a lot of concentration, a lot of screen work. My mental fog goes away
Hmm.
quite often if I certainly reduce processed foods, but certainly
Yeah.
and reduce meat as well. I'm wondering, because you wear a lot of hats. So you're an author, you're a CEO, you're a PhD, you're a lawyer. All of those trades require a lot of brain power over long periods of time. When you started living with Harley and adopting more of this diet predominantly, did you experience a positive effect on your mental capacity and the work that you were doing?
That is a fascinating question because I've never thought about it, but if I think about the things that have been accomplished um, since Harley and I have been together, and that is really the start of this change in my diet, it's kind of mind-boggling, quite frankly. And I think about it like, whoa, did that happen? But it did happen. And how did all that happen? Like, how did all of those things take place? Um, So I don't know if there's a correlation, but it sounds good. I mean, it sounds quite rational. I mean, I don't have brain fog, and I don't have. I mean, my only concentration problems is just because I got so many balls in the air. You know what I mean? I have to shift from one to the other. That's complicated. But once I'm in, I don't have focus issues. Um, I don't know. I feel really well physically and mentally. And
Yeah.
I have to believe that food, I know food and diet are part of that equation to wellness. I know it. I know it. I know it because I've always listened to my body. Even when I was eating meat, you know, I knew when something was too rich, too heavy, too this. You crave things. And I've never I've thankfully had issues with my weight or my, concerns about those types of things. And that was just maybe part of my family culture as well. But I just feel like I'm comfortable in my body. You're active, you eat well, you're active, you eat well. I don't think about it that much. And because it's something that I enjoy doing, it becomes a very healthy part of my psyche.
Hmm.
And I think also with living with Harley and going through the journey of learning to cook differently and learning so many new recipes and so many different cuisines, and that's mind expanding. That's really healthy too, right? It's what you're putting in here, what you're putting in here, and then of course how you're giving that to other people. I think that's what life is really kind of about. I mean,
Yeah.
philosophically.
Yeah, it's that shared experience. It's something you're discovering something together in some ways, or
Yeah.
you're preparing things for somebody. Do you like this? What don't you like? And it's because you're existing with that person. You want to know these details,
Yes.
and to grow.
And that you're helping them stay well.
Right. Yeah, you want them around. That's why you're with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, absolutely. And, even if somebody thinks a particular dietary change is having more of an impact than it physiologically may be, well, so what? Even if it's your mind convincing you of it, well, that's okay because you're still having the healthier option anyway. So you're
Yeah.
still benefiting yourself, and you're benefiting yourself because you think you're moving mountains.
Our mind controls our reality. In fact, controls all reality. So if you think that's why I love the placebo thing, I think it's brilliant because of course, you know what I mean? Of course your mind is saying this is working. And guess what? It starts to work because we have that curative ability in our in the way we think about our lives and the world and our realities. I can't tell you how many times I've changed my reality in the past 15 years. It's amazing. And that is a yeah, I mean that's a different subject, but you know, I didn't know I was going to write a cookbook. That's crazy. I'm like, oh yeah, that's wow, that happened, you know?
Well, I'm glad it did happen because, as I
Thank
said,
you.
I think it serves more than, I mean, just the food element is fantastic, but I think it serves more than, I think there's an overriding message that, as I've said, is incredibly valuable to, the community I've spent a lot of time with and have worked with professionally. And um, like I said, hearts are in the right place. Maybe some changed perspectives in some areas may be helpful. And this is certainly a book that speaks to that. So finally, we have something like this in the world to share with others. So it
I'm
really,
delighted. I really I didn't even know that it would have that effect, and couldn't be happier. That's exactly what I would love to hear. So thank you.
it's my pleasure. Speaking of Harley, I do know he's out and about in the apartment.
He's loose. He's
He's
loose in the
loose.
apartment.
He's
I'll have to
unchained.
catch him.
He was loose, but we found him. Ladies and gentlemen, Harley Flanagan. How you doing, man?
Right. Great. Thank you for having me on the in the conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to wait until you were here to bring this up. I was looking through the book, checking out all the recipes, and who do I see chomping down on guacamole? My dear friend Steve Zing.
Ah,
Uh, he's
yes.
our dear friend too.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I'm
Yeah,
actually supposed to have dinner with him on Thursday, so I will
excellent.
give him the regards.
He can vouch for that guacamole. He will.
He seems to be
Yes, he
loving it
will.
in the
Yes, he
book.
will.
So
In fact, every time I go out to his studio to record, they request, and sometimes Laura comes along and cooks for everyone while we're in the studio. So that always works out well.
They have a nice kitchen, so it's a pleasure.
right on.
I would
As
say
soon as
this.
I saw that, I took the photo and I texted it to him. I said, I'm reading Laura's book, and who do I see?
I love that. That is so cute.
Well, I will tell you guys what. I have the privilege of eating her food every day, almost every day. The only times I don't is if she needs a break from cooking and doesn't have time. That's literally the only time that we will order or go out because I prefer her food pretty much over just about any delivery or restaurant because it's just better
Thank you.
and I know the ingredients are better.
Hmm.
And when you cook stuff yourself, you know what you get.
The ingredients are really important.
Yeah.
Getting back to what we were talking about, what you put in to your body. Even if the food at a restaurant is wonderful, you're always thinking, what kind of oil are they using? What kind of this? What kind of that?
I'm not always thinking that, but I definitely feel different the next day.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I know the difference just by how my body reacts over the next day or two, and even in my sleep, I can,
Yeah.
by how well I sleep, you can tell how you're processing things.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you joined us because I specifically wanted to talk to you about your history as a vegetarian because I do know it goes back to
Yeah.
at least like 80, 82, I want to say.
I almost, let me think. When did I stop eating meat? Around, at least, yeah, early 80s. It might have been a little bit later than that, but way more than, I mean, most of my life. Let me just put it that way. And I mean, in fact, if I eat things that are too meat-like, um, sometimes it kind of skews me out a little bit, but I don't really remember what it's like to eat meat anymore, to be honest.
Mm. So you've made that decision, A, at a time where vegetarianism wasn't as widespread as it is today, and two, you did it in where you grew up. I know a bit about how you came up. Not the most hospitable place for a lot of things, let alone vegetarianism. I mean, what were those early days like trying to maintain this lifestyle choice in that kind of environment? I'm sure the
Well,
options weren't plentiful.
in New York, it was a lot easier than any of the other places that I would visit when I was, say, on tour. On tour, it was literally like the the things that I would eat were ridiculous. I mean, it was down to like, okay, a sandwich that would have literally anything on it that was not meat. Like I'd have a sandwich with pieces of tofu, peanut butter, green peppers, like sprouts, like literally anything I could put between the two pieces of bread that was not meat. And I would be happy to have that. I'd wind up going to pizza parlors and being like, I'll have a pizza pie with just sauce because I knew that the cheese was probably spiked with like rennet or cow enzyme for this like the stuff, like I always had all these little details that I was always like adhering to, and it's actually funny because throughout my life I've had a history on and off with my struggles with like drug use and so on, but the one thing I was always very consistent with was being a vegetarian. And I kind of think that had a little bit to do with my survival and my recovery,
I think it had a lot to do with it.
you know.
Yeah, at least you're putting something good in there.
Right.
That's what I'm saying,
Right.
and it wasn't like extra stuff to deal with, it wasn't just my diet that was bad and the drugs.
Right.
It was just the drugs. It wasn't my diet, But all that being said, in New York, it was always fairly easy because there's always been a lot of food choices in New York. And as a vegetarian, and even to this day on tour, I will typically seek out things like Thai food or Indian food or stuff that I know has a decent amount of vegetarian options just because of the culture. So that's always been my go-to. And but I'm a little bit less. I'm more lenient than I used to be. I don't look to find out and go crazy if there might be an egg in the bread or whatever. I'm just like, look, I'm gonna die anyway. And for starters, you know what? I don't get into this whole. I used to be a lot more judgmental about people's diets because of because of animals, basically. Cut a long story short.
Right.
And over the last bunch of years, I've come to the realization that, we're all killing something all the time. Even vegetables are alive. And the more I've learned about, especially the more I've learned about, believe it or not, mushrooms and fungus and how incredibly important they are to just like the network of the forests and everything else, and how complex all these life forms are that we take for granted. I'm like, you know what? I can't say that what I'm eating and consuming is any less evolved, or I don't know if intelligent is the right word, but you know what? This is all part of life, right? So I'm not going to judge. If anything, I'm more against the meat industry
Right. Right.
and unethical
Exactly.
farming.
I feel the same.
I feel like, if people were hunter-gatherers like
Yes.
they once were, it would be a much better situation all around. I don't know. I can't even tell you if eating some meats once in a while or some fish, that might be actually scientifically better for you. I don't know. I know that I've been a vegetarian since I guess like 82. Yeah, 82. And the only time I started dabbling with eating uh like chicken, turkey, fish, stuff like that was when I was competing for a long time. I was competing in grappling, submission, fighting. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt, so I was competing a lot for a while. And for about 7, 8 months, just out of an experiment, I said, you know what? I'm not gonna like go to hell and like face some, chicken god of death if I eat a chicken. Let's just, so I, so I was like, let me eat some chicken and turkey and just for the experiment and see if and fish and see if it gives me any additional strength or stamina or any of the things that people always bitch about being vegetarian. How do you get your strength? How do you get,
Protein, right.
So it's purely based on just wanting to feel for myself if there was any benefits. So I was eating chicken, turkey, and fish for about 7 months. And I'll be honest, for the first week or so, I felt a little bit of a burst of energy. And I think it was just from the large amount of protein that I was all of a sudden getting. But
Mhm.
after that, it really dissipated. I went back to feeling more or less the normal way I felt. And I didn't actually gain any real strength or size benefit for that matter. So I came to the conclusion that, at least for me, I just went back to what I was comfortable with which was a vegetarian diet. And I'm definitely, again, I'm not judging people on what they do. I just believe more in ethical, treatment of animals. And, I know there are more expensive, bougie ways of eating meat where you can get your grass-fed, roaming the earth meat and whatever. And honestly, I think that's probably worth the extra money because it's probably a hell of a lot better for you, not just
Sure.
physically, but probably, I don't want to get all, but probably like karmically and spiritually, you don't, eating something that has lived a natural life is probably a
Yes.
lot better than eating something that was completely stressed out from the time it was born to the time it
100%.
died. So I'm not pushing vegetarianism on anybody. I just know that I'm 58 years old and I do about 1,000 push-ups a day. I train jujitsu, I do Muay Thai. I'm very active. And I'm very physical all the time. And I'm not showing any signs of slowing down. I'm not showing any weakness. I got injuries. I've been alive a long time.
I
That's
think
all.
I think I think one of the things I've seen too is a lot of the people that I know who are completely vegetarian are quite healthy. They're healthier weight.
Fact.
They're physically more active. They live just more active lives for longer.
They also don't have to struggle with their weight as much
Right.
because it's just easier to
It's just easier to
process,
deal. Right. It's just you're not struggling to gain, to lose, to this, to that. It's just like you're just your
I mean,
body is in
this
rhythm.
is just a simple and kind of gross
Oh, I know
fact.
what you're gonna say. It's totally
Okay,
gross.
I'm on tour with all my guys, and it's like, you're always waiting for somebody to get out of the bathroom. And it's just like, yo, dude, if you weren't eating like a half a cow, it might not take you a half an hour to unload.
At 32 years old.
Like I go in there, I'm out of there before you can even say, is there anybody in there? I sit and drop, I'm out, man. I got, so if you got problems, man, maybe you should change your diet, man. So anyway, enough of that. But point is I'm, you know, but and I will say this, I've been a vegetarian for most of my life at this point, but I've never eaten better than since I met
Dun, 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 ladies,
Laura
ladies.
Lee, Dr. Laura Lee Flanagan.
Love it.
No,
Thank
it's a
you.
fact. And you know what? Even as a vegetarian, she's definitely upped my game because I was just more about eating vegetarian. She's really about eating things that haven't been polluted or things that haven't been toxified with any kind of, she's
Yeah.
more conscious of that than I ever was. So I know even forget about eating well for a vegetarian. All I know is my game has been upped. And when I travel and even when I eat out, I'm kind of bringing the bar down a little bit. But once in a while you can bring the bar down if you know it's not going to stay down. It's no big deal,
Sure. It's
and
all about, you know,
it's like having a drink once in a while. As long as you're not like
proportion.
drinking every night and getting, turned into a damn alcoholic, who
Yeah.
cares? You know?
But that
Well,
also, yeah, that comes back to just the being a little bit more relaxed about this stuff, not being so belligerent about people's diets. I don't know anybody who's reading this book.
I used to also
I
get
don't want
really
to like be so
me
preachy,
myself. I used to
you
find
know?
myself constantly preaching and hammering people for no other reason than, like who the hell really wants to be around that guy?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, how about this? How about just live by example? And like, guess what? I got dudes half my age saying, "Damn, man, you're in great shape, yo. What do you do?" Well, I eat right and I exercise a little bit every day. Why don't you try that? It might do you some good.
Yeah,
And
totally.
and I honestly don't think that just exercise. I think that diet,
It's
you
critical.
know, I mean, but it's a combination of both because I know people,
No,
I've
you
had
have to
this
stay
I've
active.
had this discussion before. I know some incredible martial artists who eat like crap. And I've seen like high level judokas in Japan who like chain smoke cigarettes but will toss you across the room. So, but how do you want to treat your body?
Right.
You know, and I
Well,
feel
I want to toss you a question I asked Laura earlier in that, May's Mental Health Awareness Month, and you and I, you especially, but me too, grew up on those Bad Brains records, PMA, the whole thing. Um, and I know about your history. There have been some ups and downs, certainly,
more
but you're on
downs than
the
ups.
planet in 2025 doing your thing. There are no signs of slowing down that I can see. So, how would you say the diet choice you made all the way back in 82 ultimately has helped you maintain that idea of PMA and keeping your head straight?
Well, the difference is, I have always believed in positive action more than having a positive mental attitude because I know a lot of people who are really deranged who think they have a positive mental attitude who are actually doing really deranged things. So I think it's actually more about what you actually do with your actions. It's not just a mental attitude. I think Charles Manson thought he was kind of in the right place, and obviously he wasn't. So BMA is, it's a catchphrase. I'm really more about like action. And but I know for a fact that being a vegetarian definitely got me got me some longevity,
Mm,
because I look around at people my age, people my peers, people half my age, and I don't want to dog anybody, but they just don't look as good as they could. Let's just put it that way. And aside from, a few wrinkles, a few missing teeth, I'm doing all right, you know. In fact, I've only put on about 10 to 15 maybe pounds. It goes back and forth since I was in my early 20s, late teens, and
wow.
it's muscle.
Mm,
It's because I work out. I didn't put on love handles. I didn't put on, you know, extra baggage. I put on muscle because I work out. In fact, if I didn't work out, I would lose weight. I have to work out just to maintain that muscle and that size. Otherwise, I'll drop like 5 pounds easily. So, I think that that has a lot to do with my diet because I know people who just, who didn't make the same choices I made. And I did plenty of drugs and plenty of alcohol. Obviously, I reined it back over the years, but I think diet was key. I
mm.
really can't, proof's kind of in the pudding. I mean, I guess I got good genes too, but I'm just a mutt. I can't say what that comes from. Yeah.
Yeah. Right on. I wanted to mention too, obviously you have a movie coming out.
Yes, which this incredible woman is also one of the producers of.
Fantastic. I've seen the trailers. I'll link them in the video description as well. I don't want the story to be given away in this answer, so I'll ask it this way for both of you. Um, what was your immediate thought after you saw the final cut?
Well, after I stopped crying,
Well,
uh,
it's a little challenging because uh, like I think there was the almost final, which was quite a complete film. And that was really incredible. That was where we were like, wow, this just came together and it's actually just beautiful. I don't know what else to say about it except it's beautiful. Then since that, we've had to swap this out and change this out, and then you know what I mean?
There's this, there's been a
there's
couple
been
last minute
tweaks.
tweaks, which I guess in this business is very common
Common.
up until the final day that it is in
That's
theaters.
delivered, that it's delivered, that
At
it's
this point,
delivered.
it's only had the premiere, which they had to kind of like they had to get it finished for in
Yeah.
time. So,
It had some,
and then they had another showing in LA, which was like the West Coast premiere. So, as anybody who's ever been involved with this type of stuff, I never had things get seen before they're done and then they get out there done. So, but I will tell you this, man, it's, it was really nerve-wracking to have other people in charge of telling your life story and not having any control over it. And she was not even one of the storytellers, but at least I think she was more essential to them in the capacity of she knew everything and had access to all the archives and really knew my life back and forward because she, edited the book that I wrote. She forget about being married to me, but like she was without her, this thing would have never pushed through. It would have never got done at the level that it did because the director wouldn't have had the info. He wouldn't have had the knowledge. He wouldn't have had the endless photos and archives. And they got footage and stuff in this film that blew my mind, things that I had never seen before. So, I mean, I'll tell you this, it's a disturbing film in a lot of ways, but it also it gives I think a lot of hope even to like the total underdog and the total person who's like in the gutter feeling like they ain't got a hope in hell. I think it proves that you can definitely pull your shit together, even if it's, by the grace of I don't even know what, man. I don't know if there was the deal I made with the devil when I was a little kid that got me her, or if it was the grace of God, or if it was just the willpower to not give up. I know that, I mean, you get knocked down, 7 times, you get up 8. And I don't know how many times I've gotten up at this point in my life, but I'm a getting up motherfucker. You gotta kill me, So there's a movie now. Pow.
Right on. Yeah, it's actually playing up here in Somerville on my birthday in July. So
Oh, that's
Oh, happy
great.
birthday.
Yeah, that's
yeah, I'm
great.
gonna.
We'll be there, and hopefully, well, I don't know if you want to celebrate your birthday doing that, but
Oh yeah,
Well,
uh,
if you do, we'll be celebrating your birthday with you.
totally.
right on. Yeah, I'm definitely planning to go.
Oh,
Right
good.
on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited to see it. And it's always nice to touch base with people who I know have such a long history, who are doing positive and meaningful things in the here and now. There's a lot of people who talk about, oh, the 80s, the 90s, whatever it was. They
Oh,
were
those were
great.
the worst times of my life.
Yeah, yeah, I can
I mean,
see that.
a lot of great stuff happened. A lot of great music. Culturally, a lot of really cool things happened in those times. I'm never going to deny all that. But me personally, you know, my life is 1,000 times better, a million times better now than it was then. I'm not very nostalgic. I have a lot of memories, but I'm way happier.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's wonderful to see both of you doing so well in your endeavors. Again, for the viewer, the book is called Hardcore Vegetarian. Welcome to the Vegedome. I cannot recommend it enough. I will be sharing it with my vegan animal rights colleagues because I think they need to read this for.
And to those people, I wasn't crapping on anything to do with animal rights. I'm all about animal rights,
Yeah,
seriously. But I think if everybody would just have a more ethical, more give a fuck attitude, I think even the people who aren't vegetarians, I think everything would be going more in the right direction. And if we could just be slightly more open-minded, we might be able to find a place where actually the planet could benefit,
yeah.
because in reality, animals die and we all got to be part of this thing, right?
Yeah, definitely right on. Like I said, I'll include all the pertinent links for the book, as well as the film and the video. And Laura, I just really wish you well with this book. I
Thank
think,
you so
like I said,
much.
it's It's one I've wanted to read for the longest time. I'm glad someone has finally put it in the world. I wish you nothing but the greatest success with it. Harley, keep the music coming, my friend.
Absolutely.
No,
I
we
wouldn't know what
will.
else to do. I'll just
Thank
say
you,
this
Joel.
closing thing for me is all our guests love eating in this house. That's all I got to say is everybody who comes here
Thank
looks
you.
forward to my wife's cooking.
Thank you.
So, definitely get the book, people.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Joel,
absolutely.
for having us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you both.
Take care.